I am Ethan, 32 years old. Exactly 3 days after I almost died on an operating table, my own brother uninvited me from our family Christmas dinner because I did not fit his high society aesthetic. While I was lying on my living room sofa, pale, weak, and wrapped in heavy blankets trying to recover from an emergency appendectomy with severe complications, Julian called to tell me that my presence would completely ruin his high-end networking event disguised as a holiday family gathering. He actually said the words out loud to me. He said, "It is no place for losers, Ethan. You will just embarrass yourself." He let out a short, dismissive laugh right before he hung up the phone. But there is one massive, earth-shattering thing Julian and my entire family chose to ignore in their pursuit of social climbing. They did not know the quiet, unassuming guy they treated like a peasant was the very foundation holding up their entire luxury lifestyle. They did not know I was a highly paid ghostwriter for Silicon Valley tech CEOs, pulling in 7 figures a year. And more importantly, they completely forgot that the money paying for his kid's elite private school and his wife's brand new Porsche was coming directly from my personal bank account. And right now, as they scramble and beg, watching their perfect world burn to the ground, they are finally learning the true cost of their arrogance. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I watched his house of cards collapse into absolute ruin, please hit that like button if you believe in justice and karma. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means everything to me. Now, let us go back to the exact moment the illusion shattered. The notification sound on my phone felt like a physical blow to the head. My skull was pounding with the relentless rhythm of a jackhammer. I was lying in the fetal position on my living room sofa, surrounded by a fortress of used tissues, empty mugs of lukewarm herbal tea, and a bottle of prescription painkillers that barely took the edge off. The surgery had been completely brutal. There was a minor infection, a delayed healing process, and the recovery time felt like dragging myself across miles of broken glass. I felt incredibly weak. I felt small. I reached for the phone on the coffee table, my hand trembling slightly from the sheer physical exhaustion of moving a single muscle. The screen lit up brightly with the name Julian. A small, pathetic wave of relief actually washed over my chest. Finally, my older brother was checking on me. I had texted him and his wife, Victoria, right before the anesthesia pulled me under, and again when I finally got back to my house. I had received a cold, thoughtless thumbs-up emoji from Victoria and absolute radio silence from Julian. But now he was calling. I foolishly thought he cared. I cleared my dry, scratchy throat and answered the phone. I told him I was finally back home and that the last few days had been rough. I tried to tell him about the infection, but Julian cut me off before I could even finish my sentence. His voice was crisp, highly energetic, and completely devoid of any human concern. He sounded like he was walking briskly through a busy office or a shopping mall. He loudly announced that he and Victoria were finalizing the Christmas Eve dinner list and had expensive caterers arriving in an hour for a mandatory tasting menu. The painkillers made my brain incredibly slow to process the massive shift in his tone. I told him I was not sure what I could bring this year since standing by a hot stove was completely out of the question for my stitches. But I proudly mentioned I had already ordered the expensive vintage wines Victoria always liked for the family gift exchange. There was a pause on the line. It was a heavy, pregnant silence that felt sharper than the fresh surgical incision on my abdomen. Julian let out a loud, theatrical sigh. It was the fake, sympathetic noise he always made right before doing something incredibly selfish and calculating. He told me they were making some drastic changes to the guest list this year. He said the vibe was going to be entirely different, very high-end, exclusive. Victoria had invited Eleanor, the vice president of her massive real estate firm, and Julian was bringing in 2 wealthy angel investors for his brand new business venture. I shifted my legs on the sofa, wincing at the sharp, burning pull in my side, and told him that sounded like a very intense evening. I promised I would just sit quietly in the corner of the room. I told him I would not be in the way of his VIP guests. I told him I just really needed to be around my family because being alone in a quiet house while recovering from a major surgery was starting to take a dark toll on my mental health. Julian sighed again, much louder this time. It was an impatient, highly irritated sound clearly indicating I was being a burden. He told me I was not listening to him. He said this was absolutely not a family potluck. This was a critical networking event disguised as a Christmas party, and appearance was everything in the business world. And frankly, he said, looking at how I had been looking lately, I just did not fit the exclusive aesthetic they were building. My breath hitched in my throat. The pain in my stomach vanished, replaced by a cold shock. I asked him exactly what he meant by that. He took on that lecturing, condescending tone I had absolutely hated since we were children. He pointed out that I work from home. He noted that I live in cheap sweatpants and drive a beat-up Honda Civic. He said I was comfortable in my mediocrity, but the people coming to his house were absolute sharks. They were winners. He said Victoria was deeply stressed about making a perfect impression, and having her brother-in-law sitting in the corner looking like a sick ghost who had not brushed his hair in a week was absolutely not the image they were projecting to the world. Then came the final, brutal blow. He called me a stagnant loser. He told me to stay home, pop my pills, and said they might send over some cold leftovers if there were any remaining. The line went dead. He hung up on me. I stared at the black screen of my phone. The reflection showed a pale, tired man with dark, heavy circles under his eyes. I dropped the phone onto the carpet and closed my eyes tightly. Hot tears leaked out despite my best efforts to stop them. It was not just the cold rejection from my own brother. It was the absolute audacity, the blinding ignorance, the sheer cruelty of kicking a man while he was bleeding on his couch. But to understand why his cruel words cut so deeply into my soul, and why that luxury Porsche was about to be hooked up to a tow truck in front of his wealthy friends, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to look at the massive mountain of debt I had been silently carrying for him. Growing up in our suburban household, the dividing line between Julian and me was drawn in thick, permanent marker from day one. Julian was the undisputed golden child. He was the high school quarterback, the prom king, the kid with the charismatic million-dollar smile who could charm a strict math teacher into bumping a failing grade up to a passing one just by asking about her weekend plans. I was the quiet one in the background, the invisible bookworm, the kid who stayed in his small bedroom building custom computers and writing long stories while everyone else was at football games. Our parents, Arthur and Beatrice, absolutely adored Julian. They looked at him and saw a future Fortune 500 CEO, a man destined for incredible greatness and massive wealth. They looked at me and saw a pleasant afterthought, a backup plan they never intended to use. When it came time for college, the blatant favoritism hit a terrifying peak. My parents quietly liquidated a massive chunk of their retirement accounts and took out a dangerous second mortgage on our childhood home to send Julian to an incredibly expensive, out-of-state private university. They justified it by saying Julian needed access to the right network of elite people. When my turn came to apply for schools, my father handed me a cheap, glossy brochure for the local community college and told me that hard work and student loans build strong character. I did not throw a tantrum. I worked exhausting night shifts at a greasy diner to pay for my tuition in cash. I did not complain to anyone. I just put my head down, studied late into the night, and worked. Over the next decade, Julian systematically burned through every single advantage handed to him on a silver platter. He started a luxury watch brand that went violently bankrupt in less than 14 months. He tried to launch a massive tech startup incubator without knowing a single line of computer code. My parents bailed him out every single time the walls closed in. They even sold a beautiful piece of lakefront land my grandfather had specifically left for both of us, entirely to fund Julian's empty business visions. Meanwhile, I quietly built my own highly lucrative career from my living room. I became a highly sought-after ghostwriter. I took the raw, chaotic, disorganized thoughts of brilliant but terribly inarticulate tech founders and turned them into massive best-selling books and polished Forbes articles. My hourly rates became absolutely astronomical, but my personal lifestyle remained completely invisible. I bought a modest, heavily insulated, paid-off house in a quiet neighborhood. I aggressively maxed out my 401k and my investment portfolios. I drove a highly reliable 10-year-old car. I did not need a shiny Rolex on my wrist to know exactly what time it was. 3 years ago, the fake reality Julian built came crashing down violently on his head. It was a freezing Tuesday night in November, pouring heavy rain. There was a frantic, terrifying knocking at my front door. I opened it to find Julian soaked to the absolute bone, his eyes red and swollen from crying. He looked completely terrified. He stepped into my hallway, collapsed against the wall, and broke down completely. He confessed the dark truth he had been hiding from our parents. His credit cards were maxed out to the absolute limit. He was 3 full months behind on his massive, bloated mortgage payments. And Victoria, his beautiful, incredibly shallow wife who had grown up with a silver spoon in her mouth, was actively packing her expensive luggage. She was threatening a messy divorce and preparing to take their 2 young kids, Leo and Chloe, back to her wealthy parents' estate in Connecticut. Julian grabbed my shirt with both hands. He was violently sobbing, begging me for financial salvation. He said he just needed a short runway to get back on his feet. He swore he had a brand new project, a guaranteed massive success, but he needed time to secure the investor capital. He looked me dead in the eye and told me I was the only person in the entire world he could trust with his life. I looked at my older brother, a man who had every single advantage in the world handed to him, now reduced to a pathetic puddle of water and tears on my hardwood floor. I thought about my nephew Leo, who was 7 years old at the time and struggling with math. I thought about my sweet niece Chloe, who was 5 and loved to draw. I could not let those innocent kids lose their family home and face the trauma of a bitter divorce. So, against my better judgment, I made a strict financial deal with him. I flatly refused to hand Julian a blank check or deposit money directly into his account because I knew it would instantly vanish into expensive business lunches and bad investments. Instead, I told him I would directly cover the absolute essentials to keep Victoria from walking out the door. I set up direct, recurring electronic transfers from my bank account to the elite private school Leo and Chloe attended. And, to keep Victoria's fragile public image intact so she could drive to her high-end real estate showings, I completely took over the massive monthly lease on her brand new Porsche Macan. I did it out of pure love. I did it because family is supposed to protect each other when the storm hits. But I quickly learned that gratitude has a very short, highly perishable shelf life. As the stressful months turned into long years, Julian never got a real, steady job. He vaguely called himself a freelance consultant. He never paid me back a single dime of the money I was bleeding for him. Worse, the entire family dynamic shifted drastically. The desperate humility he showed on my floor that rainy night completely vanished, quickly replaced by a toxic, unbearable sense of entitlement. They stopped saying thank you when the bills were paid. They stopped inviting me over for dinner unless they desperately needed free tech support for their computers or someone to watch the kids for free while they attended expensive charity galas. The real, undeniable breaking point started showing its ugly face around the holidays. Last Thanksgiving, we were all gathered at my parents' house for a massive dinner. I had quietly paid for the giant organic turkey and the expensive imported wine Victoria specifically requested, though no one mentioned that fact at the table. We were sitting around the dining room when my father, Arthur, looked at Julian with pure, unadulterated admiration. "Julian is really scaling up his operations this quarter," my dad said proudly to the room. "That new LLC is going to change everything for the family." Then my father looked directly at me, a tight, incredibly polite smile plastered on his face. "And Ethan, are you still doing that typing thing? Writing those little blogs for people on the internet?" I gripped my heavy silver fork under the table until my knuckles turned pure white. I took a deep breath, nodded calmly, and said yes, I was still writing to pay the bills. Victoria let out a small, highly condescending tinkling laugh from across the table. "It is honestly cute that you have a little hobby to keep you busy, Ethan, but you really should let Julian give you some real business advice soon. You simply cannot drive that terrible old Honda forever. It literally brings down the property value of the entire neighborhood when you park it in our driveway during visits." My parents actually chuckled at her insult. Julian smirked arrogantly and took a long sip of the expensive wine I bought with my hard-earned money. I sat there in total silence. I violently bit my tongue because I loved the kids too much to start a screaming match. I spent 2 nights a week tutoring Leo in algebra over Zoom. I bought Chloe her expensive professional art supplies every single month. I constantly told myself I was protecting them from poverty. I did not realize I was actively funding a massive delusion. I was paying top dollar for the very bullets they were confidently shooting into my back. And now, lying on my couch, recovering from major abdominal surgery, Julian had just pulled the trigger and banished me from the family. The physical, burning pain in my surgical wounds was completely eclipsed by a cold, deeply hollow ache spreading rapidly through my chest. I sat up on the sofa, aggressively wincing as the fresh stitches pulled tight against my skin. A low, incredibly dangerous simmering heat started to build deep inside my core. It had absolutely nothing to do with a post-op fever. It was pure rage. It was crystallized, absolute, uncompromising rage. He knew I was completely alone in this house. He knew I was hurting physically and mentally, and he tossed me away like expired garbage simply because my comfortable clothes did not fit his fake millionaire aesthetic. I picked my phone back up from the carpet and opened the Instagram application. Right at the very top of my timeline feed was a brand new story posted by Victoria just 20 minutes ago. I tapped the glowing circle. It was a slow panning video of their massive, heavily decorated living room. The exact room I had kept the bank from foreclosing on. It was completely decked out in custom gold and white decorations that probably cost thousands. A towering, professionally decorated Christmas tree reached the high vaulted ceiling. Soft, expensive classical music played warmly in the background. Across the bottom of the screen, Victoria had proudly typed a glowing caption, "Prepping for the biggest night of the entire year. Exclusive VIP guest list only. High life success. No negativity allowed." I watched the short video loop 3 times in total silence. No negativity allowed. I knew exactly what that meant. That was their new code word for me. I zoomed in on the video with 2 fingers. I saw the highly expensive Italian leather sofa I had helped them pick out and indirectly paid for. I saw little Leo running happily past the camera lens wearing his expensive, custom-tailored St. Jude's Preparatory Academy winter uniform. My thumb hovered dangerously over the glowing screen. Julian called me a loser on the phone. He called me totally stagnant. He confidently said I did not fit in with the winners of the world. I closed the Instagram app and immediately opened my highly secure banking portal. I bypassed my standard checking account. I scrolled quickly past my massive, diversified investment portfolios and my high-yield savings accounts. Numbers so large Julian could not even fathom them in his wildest, most desperate dreams. I firmly clicked on the Settings tab labeled Scheduled Recurring Transfers. There they were, the 3 glowing life support machines keeping his fake, plastic world breathing. Recurring monthly automated transfer, $3,200. Reference note, Leo and Chloe private tuition. Recurring monthly automated transfer, $1,150. Reference note, Victoria Lease Portia McCung. Recurring monthly automated transfer, $500. Reference note, Emergency Family Support Groceries. For 3 long, agonizing years, I had been the silent, invisible engine powering their arrogant success. I whispered his cruel words to the empty living room. Stagnant. Loser. A cold, hard, deeply unsettling smile touched my lips. It was absolutely not a happy smile. It was the precise smile of a master demolition expert looking at a condemned building right before pushing the detonator. Julian desperately wanted an exclusive Christmas for winners. He wanted a flawless aesthetic. Fine. I would give him exactly what he asked for. But he completely forgot the cardinal rule of high society. True winners pay their own massive bills. My thumb hovered heavily over the red cancel button for the St. Jude's private school tuition. A strange, incredibly powerful wave of calm washed over my entire body, completely displacing the hurt, the betrayal, and the deep humiliation. I tapped the glass screen. The banking app prompted me with a strict warning. Are you absolutely sure you want to permanently cancel this recurring transfer? This critical action cannot be undone. I tapped yes. Transfer successfully canceled. $3,200 a month, permanently gone. The next massive payment was due to the school in exactly 3 days. I moved swiftly down the digital list. The luxury Porsche lease, $1,150 a month, due on the 15th of the month. Cancel. The grocery support fund they used for expensive sushi dinners. Cancel. I sat back heavily against the couch cushions. I had just effortlessly wiped nearly $5,000 of monthly tax-free income from my brother's life with 3 simple taps of my thumb. But I knew deep down that if I just stopped paying the bills, they would eventually notice when the school administration called or the burly repo man showed up in the driveway. I wanted them to know exactly why the financial well had suddenly run bone dry. I did not have to wait very long. Exactly 2 days later, my phone lit up brightly at 10 a.m. on the dot. It was Julian calling. I let the phone ring out and go straight to voicemail. It rang again instantly. Then came a frantic, fully capitalized text message. Call me now, Ethan. Emergency. I waited 10 full minutes. I slowly walked to the kitchen, poured myself a tall glass of ice water, took a deep, centering breath, and finally called him back. What did you do? Julian screamed the absolute second the phone line connected. He did not say hello. He did not ask how my stomach was healing. He was in full, unfiltered panic mode, his voice cracking violently with pure hysteria. The school administration just called me. Mr. Harrison said the massive payment bounced hard. He said you completely removed your credit card from the parent portal. Good morning to you too, Julian, I said, keeping my vocal tone entirely flat, calm, and completely devoid of any human emotion. How is the exclusive Christmas prep going? Do not play your sick games with me, Ethan, he yelled loudly. I am in the middle of a critical meeting. Harrison said if the tuition balance is not paid in full by 5 p.m. today, both kids are permanently unenrolled for the upcoming spring semester. What the hell is going on? Did your stupid bank screw up the transfer? No, I said calmly, taking a slow sip of water. I canceled it. The heavy silence on the other end of the line was absolute and deafening. For 5 long, glorious seconds, I only heard his ragged, panicked breathing echoing in the receiver. You, what? Why? Why in God's name would you do that to us? Because, I said, channeling every single ounce of freezing ice in my veins. I am a loser, remember? You proudly told me 2 days ago on the phone. This family is no place for losers. And losers do not pay for elite private schools, Julian. Real winners do. And since you are such a massive, successful winner now, with your high-end corporate friends and your exclusive aesthetic party, I figured you did not need my stagnant loser money anymore. You petty, vindictive piece of trash, he sputtered violently, desperately grasping for words. You are doing this right now? Right before Christmas Eve? You are intentionally punishing Leo and Chloe because I accidentally hurt your fragile feelings. I am absolutely not punishing anyone. I corrected him sharply, cutting through his manipulation. I am simply stepping back. You clearly stated I bring the energy down. You said I embarrass you and Victoria. Well, neither does my money. You absolutely cannot have it both ways, Julian. You cannot treat me like garbage in private and use me as a free ATM in public. It is $3,000, Ethan, he shouted, his voice echoing loudly in what sounded like an empty office stairwell. I do not have that kind of liquid cash sitting around right now. I am heavily tying up capital for the new business launch. Then maybe you should not be hosting a heavily catered party with expensive wine, I said coldly. Or better yet, ask your 2 new angel investors. I am sure they would love backing a winner like you who cannot afford his kids' education. You are completely ruining our lives, he shrieked, totally losing his composure. Victoria is going to have a massive nervous breakdown. Do you have any idea how much pressure she is under to make this VIP party perfect? Actually, I do, I replied, twisting the knife just a fraction more. Which is exactly why I also permanently canceled the lease payment on her Porsche Macan. It is due on the 15th. You might want to give her a heads up so she does not drive it to the country club and get stranded. He screamed a long, visceral string of terrible curses at me. He told me I legally could not do that the expensive car was registered in her name. I firmly reminded him that the money was coming straight from my account, and the bank of Ethan was permanently and forever closed for business. I hung up the phone. My heart was hammering violently against my ribs. My hands were shaking. It felt terrible to hear my brother break down. But God, it felt amazing to finally stand up for myself. The desperate retaliation was swift and entirely pathetic. The family flying monkeys were immediately deployed to my phone. 2 hours later, my cell phone rang again. It was my mother, Beatrice, with Aunt Clara patched in on a three-way conference call. They did not ask how my surgery recovery was going. "Ethan, what is horribly wrong with you?" my mother demanded immediately, her voice trembling with manufactured, theatrical grief. "Julian is practically in tears. He says you cruelly cut off the children's education out of sheer, petty jealousy over his success." "He told you I was jealous?" I asked, laughing bitterly into the phone. "Did he happen to tell you he completely uninvited me to Christmas dinner because I am not high-class enough for his new friends? He is under massive corporate pressure." Aunt Clara chimed in, perfectly playing the ultimate manipulator role. "He is building a lasting family legacy. You have a little house and zero responsibilities. You have plenty of extra money sitting around. You are being incredibly selfish and cruel. Family always helps family, Ethan." "Family respects family," I fired back without hesitation. "If his legacy is so incredibly strong, he can pay his own bills." I hung up on them and blocked both numbers. But Julian was not done. He was dangerously desperate. The next morning, I woke up to an urgent, red-flashing fraud alert from my premium credit card company. Someone had just attempted to charge $4,500 at a high-end designer clothing boutique in the city. My blood ran completely cold. It was an emergency backup card I had given Julian 2 full years ago when his old car broke down in the middle of nowhere. I had explicitly told him to destroy the plastic card immediately afterward. I called the bank's fraud department immediately. The security agent confirmed the physical card was not present. Someone had manually entered the numbers online. Julian was actively trying to steal from me to buy luxury gifts to save face for his party. I told the bank it was massive fraud. I canceled the card permanently and filed a report. That was the exact moment any lingering trace of guilt I had evaporated into thin air. This was absolutely not just a sibling rivalry anymore. This was calculated financial abuse. This was felony theft. And I was going to burn his entire fake facade to the ground. The burning anger inside me rapidly crystallized into pure, cold, strategic focus. If Julian wanted to aggressively play the role of a high-society tycoon who answered to no one, I was going to treat him exactly like a defaulting corporate business partner. I picked up my phone and immediately called my closest friend from college, Marcus. Marcus is a senior corporate litigator downtown, a brilliant, terrifying shark in a tailored suit who absolutely does not tolerate nonsense from anyone. I carefully explained the entire messy situation to him over the phone. I told him every detail about the canceled school tuition, the Porsche lease, the ridiculous Christmas party, and the shocking attempted credit card fraud from that morning. Marcus listened in total, unbroken silence until I finished my entire story. "You have been blindly giving him how much money?" Marcus asked, his deep voice completely deadpan and serious. "I have a highly detailed spreadsheet," I said confidently. I opened my laptop computer and pulled up the meticulous financial records I had kept strictly for tax purposes. Every single tuition payment, every luxury car lease payment, the emergency cash loans he solemnly swore he would pay back, even the expensive vet bills for Victoria's purebred dog. It totals out to roughly $150,000 over the last 3 years. Marcus let out a low, impressed whistle through the phone. "Did he ever put in writing that these transfers were loans and not gifts?" "Yes, absolutely," I replied, quickly pulling up my archived text messages on the cloud. 3 years ago, quote, "I will pay you back every single cent, Ethan. I just need time to scale." and I have dozens of other messages over the years explicitly acknowledging the mounting debt. Perfect, Marcus said, and I could practically hear the dangerous, predatory smile forming in his voice. We are drafting a formal legal demand for complete repayment. I want all $150,000 fully accounted for in the document. It obviously won't force him to write a massive check today, but it legally freezes him in place. If he tries to quietly sell the house or take out another line of credit to survive, this demand letter will act as a massive, immovable roadblock. When exactly do you want it delivered to his house? Christmas Eve, I said instantly, without a second of hesitation. He specifically wants an exclusive, high-end Christmas party for his VIP guests. Absolutely nothing says high society quite like a uniformed legal courier showing up at your front door during appetizers. While Marcus went straight to work drafting the devastating legal strike, I started closely monitoring the massive cracks rapidly forming in Julian's perfect, plastic world. Without my constant stream of money, the financial pressure was crushing them instantly. The private school had clearly given them a short grace period to find the funds, but the toxic rumors were already starting to spread rapidly among the wealthy parents. I knew this for a fact because Sarah, a longtime family friend who always hovered closely around Victoria to soak up the leftover glamour, sent me a highly suspicious text message. Hey Ethan, I just heard you are not coming to the big party. So sad to miss you. By the way, is Julian's new business doing okay? Victoria was acting super weird and stressed at lunch today at the club. I did not reply to her message. I let them sweat in silence. But my growing curiosity got the better of me, so I logged into a hidden burner Facebook account I strictly used for local neighborhood watch updates. I went straight to the gated community's private, members-only group page. Right there at the top, posted just an hour ago by Victoria, was a frantic, desperate listing. Selling lease takeover for 2023 Porsche Macan. Immaculate condition. We simply need to upgrade to a much larger vehicle for our growing family. Please DM for details. Serious inquiries only. Must move fast. I stared intently at the glowing computer screen. A growing family? It was a pathetic, completely transparent lie. She was scrambling for her life. The massive lease payment was due in exactly 2 days. The repo man was already circling their neighborhood, and she was desperately trying to pawn the toxic debt off on one of her wealthy neighbors before the towing company inevitably found the luxury car. They were violently suffocating under the crushing weight of their own massive lies. The shiny facade was actively cracking into a million pieces, and they were using cheap duct tape to hold the illusion together just long enough to heavily impress their VIP guests. I learned from another mutual business connection exactly who those VIP guests actually were. Victoria had invited her direct boss, Eleanor, a highly connected powerhouse vice president at the commercial real estate firm. Julian had aggressively invited 2 major angel investors, Richard and Tom, desperately hoping to secure massive funding for his empty shell of an LLC. These wealthy people absolutely did not know the real Julian and Victoria. They only knew the carefully crafted mask. They only knew the expensive imported wine, the fully catered food, and the shiny Porsche parked proudly in the driveway. I looked at the digital calendar on my desk. It was December 20th, exactly 4 days until Christmas Eve. My surgical incision was finally healing nicely. My mind was sharper and clearer than it had been in years. I had spent my entire adult life standing quietly in the dark shadows, letting my family treat me like a disposable stepping stone. I had foolishly bought into the toxic narrative that I was just the quiet, uninteresting younger brother who was only useful when the massive bills were due. I firmly closed my laptop and looked out the living room window at the heavy falling snow. I was absolutely going to attend that Christmas party. I was not going to stay, and I was certainly not going to eat their expensive catered food. But I was going to deliver a beautiful present they would never, ever forget. I truly thought the worst of the painful betrayal was completely behind me. I honestly thought my parents blindly supporting Julian was the absolute deepest the knife could possibly go. I was so incredibly wrong. The real, horrifying truth about my family's financial loyalty was waiting patiently for me at that party. and it was going to change absolutely everything I thought I knew about my own blood. Christmas Eve finally arrived in our city, and it brought with it a brutally cold, biting winter wind that seemed to easily slice right through the heavy glass of my car windows. I sat silently parked in my 10-year-old, fully paid-off Honda Civic just down the street from Julian's massive, sprawling suburban house. Or, at least, the sprawling house that the bank still technically owned for a few more weeks until harsh reality completely caught up with his massive financial lies. I sat there alone in the driver's seat, the heater of my old car struggling to keep the freezing temperature at bay, simply watching the heavy, wet snow rapidly accumulate on the hood of my car. I was absolutely not invited to this highly exclusive holiday gathering. I fully knew that. My own older brother had made that painfully, abundantly clear when he called me while I was bleeding on my couch to tell me my presence would entirely ruin his corporate aesthetic. But I had two small presents resting carefully in the back seat of my car, wrapped in simple, unassuming brown paper. One was a highly specialized, incredibly expensive coding kit for my bright young nephew Leo. The other was a professional-grade watercolor art set for my niece Chloe. I flatly refused to let my older brother's massive, fragile ego completely rob his innocent children of a relationship with their uncle on Christmas. They did not deserve to be punished for the sins of their greedy parents. My tactical plan for the cold evening was incredibly simple and straightforward. I was going to quietly walk up the long driveway, drop the two wrapped gifts right at the front door, send a quick text message to Julian to let him know they were sitting there on the porch, and immediately leave the premises before I could be insulted, degraded, or humiliated by my toxic family ever again. I looked down the pristine, perfectly manicured street. The strict local homeowners association, the HOA, mandated perfectly uniform holiday lights for all residents, and every single massive house on the wealthy block strictly complied with the expensive, glowing aesthetic. But as I sat there watching the quiet street through the falling snow, a sleek, black corporate town car slowly pulled up to Julian's driveway. A sharp, incredibly elegant woman wearing a stunning emerald green wool coat stepped out into the freezing cold night. I instantly recognized her face from the professional corporate profile photos Victoria was always proudly showing off to our family. It was Eleanor, the powerhouse vice president of the commercial real estate firm where Victoria worked. Eleanor was the exact woman Victoria was desperately hoping would hand her a massive, lucrative promotion and a massive salary increase in the upcoming year. Right behind the corporate town car, a brand new electric Tesla silently rolled to a stop at the curb. Two older men in highly expensive, custom-tailored suits stepped out onto the snowy sidewalk. These were Richard and Tom, the two wealthy angel investors Julian was aggressively trying to court to secure massive funding for his completely empty shell of a business venture. Julian's house was practically glowing against the dark, freezing winter sky. Every single large bay window was ablaze with warm, inviting golden light. I could easily see the dark silhouettes of wealthy people moving smoothly inside the living room, holding elegant crystal wine glasses and laughing loudly at jokes I could not hear. It looked completely perfect from the outside. It looked incredibly expensive. It looked exactly like a massive, carefully constructed, incredibly fragile lie. I took a deep, steadying breath, grabbed the two wrapped gifts from the back seat, and stepped out of my car into the biting winter cold. My heavy winter boots crunched loudly on the frozen pavement as I walked purposefully up the long, winding driveway. As I approached the large three-car garage, I noticed something incredibly pathetic and deeply revealing about their current situation. Victoria's white Porsche Macan was absolutely not parked proudly in the center of the driveway for the VIP corporate guests to admire. Instead, the luxury vehicle was aggressively squeezed into a dark, narrow spot on the far side of the house, partially hidden behind tall, thick evergreen bushes. She was intentionally hiding the expensive car from the street view. She absolutely knew the repo man was actively scanning license plates in her zip code tonight, and she was terrified of losing her ultimate status symbol before the VIP party ended. I reached the massive, solid oak front door and firmly raised my gloved hand to knock. Before my knuckles could even graze the dark, polished wood, the heavy door violently swung open from the inside. There stood Julian, He was wearing an incredibly ridiculous, dark burgundy velvet tuxedo jacket that probably cost more than my entire first year of college tuition. His hair was perfectly styled and slicked back, and he held a heavy crystal glass of expensive imported scotch in his right hand. The bright, fake, charismatic smile on his face instantly vanished the absolute second his eyes locked onto mine. His face completely drained of all color, turning a sickly, terrifying shade of pale gray. He looked like he had just seen a ghost standing on his porch. "What in the hell are you doing here?" Julian hissed viciously, quickly stepping outside into the freezing cold and pulling the heavy front door partially shut behind him to physically block the view of the bright, warm party inside. "Merry Christmas to you too, Julian," I said calmly, keeping my voice entirely steady despite the massive surge of adrenaline currently hammering against my ribs. "I am just dropping off these gifts for Leo and Chloe. I am absolutely not staying to ruin your exclusive corporate aesthetic. Just take the boxes so I can go home." I shoved the brown paper packages toward his chest. Julian did not take the boxes. He looked me up and down with pure, unadulterated disgust. I was wearing comfortable dark denim jeans, a thick wool winter coat, and a simple knitted scarf. I looked exactly like what I was. A regular, hard-working man who had just come from the cold outside. Absolutely not a wealthy socialite ready to discuss a massive real estate portfolio over imported caviar. "I explicitly told you to stay away from my house tonight," Julian whispered angrily, his eyes darting frantically in absolute panic toward the street to see if anyone was watching us. "I am actively securing my entire financial future right now. Richard and Tom are inside drinking the vintage wine right now. You absolutely cannot be seen standing on my porch looking like a homeless person. Give me the damn boxes and get off my property right now before I call the neighborhood security patrol to aggressively escort you out." Before I could even formulate a proper response to his insane, cruel threat, a sharp, highly commanding woman's voice called out from the warm foyer right behind him. "Who is at the door, Julian? It is absolutely freezing out there. Tell them to come inside and shut the door before you let all the heat out." It was Eleanor. Julian completely panicked. His eyes widened in sheer, absolute terror. He absolutely could not make a loud, aggressive scene on his front porch in front of the vice president of his wife's firm. He forced a tight, highly unnatural, grimacing smile onto his face and slowly pushed the heavy oak door wider. "It is just Ethan, my younger brother," Julian called back into the house, his voice shaking slightly with nervous, frantic energy. He reached out, grabbed my arm with a painful, vice-like grip, and violently yanked me over the threshold into the bright foyer. "Smile, drop the stupid boxes on the table, and immediately leave through the kitchen." He whispered directly into my ear, his breath smelling heavily of scotch and raw, unadulterated fear. "Do not you dare embarrass me in front of these people tonight." The overwhelming warmth of the massive house hit my cold face instantly. The air smelled strongly of fresh pine needles, expensive cinnamon candles, and high-end roasted catering. The large foyer opened directly into the expansive living room where about 15 incredibly well-dressed people were casually mingling. The loud, lively conversation in the room completely stopped. Every single pair of eyes slowly turned to look at me standing awkwardly by the front door holding two simple brown paper packages. "Ethan." Victoria suddenly appeared from the massive designer kitchen, holding a large silver tray of complicated appetizers. Her perfectly manicured face contorted into a mask of pure, absolute horror. She stared at my wet winter boots, then looked down in complete panic at her pristine, incredibly expensive white imported rug. "We absolutely were not expecting you tonight. Julian told everyone you were violently ill and highly contagious." "I am leaving right now," I said clearly, looking directly into Victoria's terrified eyes. "I am just dropping these gifts off for my niece and nephew. I absolutely do not want to interrupt your high-end corporate networking." As I turned to place the two boxes on the entryway table, I saw my parents, Arthur and Beatrice, sitting comfortably on the expensive leather sofa near the roaring fireplace. My mother's face tightened with extreme, visible disapproval. My father actually stood up, pointing a highly aggressive finger at me from across the room. Ethan, your brother explicitly told you this was a closed corporate event, my father said loudly, completely intending to publicly scold me like a disobedient child in front of the wealthy strangers. You have zero business being here tonight. Have some basic respect for Julian's important career and leave right now. You are entirely ruining the mood. I stared at my father, the man who had consistently prioritized Julian's fake success over my actual existence since I was a little boy. The man who was currently sitting in a house that I had personally saved from total foreclosure, confidently drinking expensive wine that I had purchased with my own money, aggressively telling me I did not belong in the very room my money had paid for. The absolute sheer audacity of the entire situation was intoxicating. Before I could turn around and walk back out the front door into the freezing snow, the tall woman in the stunning emerald green coat stepped directly into the center of the foyer. It was Eleanor. She was holding a crystal glass of champagne, looking incredibly elegant and utterly intimidating. She completely ignored Julian, Victoria, and my visibly angry parents. She squinted her sharp, analytical eyes directly at my face, tilting her head slightly as if trying to solve a highly complex puzzle. Wait just one single moment, Eleanor said, her commanding voice easily cutting through the tense, awkward silence of the large living room. She took 2 slow, purposeful steps toward me. Ethan? Ethan as in Ethan the ghostwriter? The exact man who structurally edited and entirely rewrote the Horizon Tech CEO memoir last spring. The entire living room went completely dead silent. You could have easily heard a single pin drop on the expensive hardwood floor. Julian aggressively blinked his eyes, completely confused and entirely derailed by the unexpected interaction. He let out a high-pitched, incredibly nervous laugh that sounded more like a dry choke. What? No, Eleanor. There must be a massive misunderstanding here. Julian stammered loudly. This is just my little brother, Ethan. He just writes silly little blogs on the internet from his couch. He is currently in between real jobs right now, struggling a bit financially. You know how the economy is right now. We kindly try to help him out with family charity where we can. He was actually doing it again, right to my face, in front of a room full of corporate VIPs. He was intentionally painting me as a pathetic charity case to desperately elevate his own fake status. Eleanor completely ignored Julian's frantic babbling. She walked right up to me, extending her hand with a look of pure, unadulterated professional reverence. You are the absolute best structural editor and ghostwriter on the entire East Coast, Eleanor said loudly, ensuring every single wealthy investor in the room heard her words clearly. My chief executive officer actively tried to hire you on a massive retainer contract last year. You cost an absolute fortune. Your corporate lawyer told us your private waiting list for new clients was over 6 months long, and you firmly rejected our massive salary offer without a second thought because you were fully booked with Silicon Valley billionaires. I smiled a small, highly genuine smile and confidently shook her extended hand. It is actually an 8-month waiting list now, Eleanor. It is incredibly nice to finally meet you in person. Your CEO runs a brilliant operation, but my schedule was simply too full to take on another massive project at the time. Julian's face instantly drained of every single drop of remaining color. He looked like he was about to physically vomit on the white rug. The fake narrative he had carefully constructed for years was violently slipping through his trembling fingers. I really think you are horribly mistaken, Eleanor, Julian stammered loudly, desperately trying to regain control of the room. Ethan heavily relies on us for money. He drives a rusted 10-year-old Honda. He does not have corporate clients. I think we should entirely stop pretending right now, Julian. I interrupted him, my voice carrying clearly and powerfully through the silent, highly attentive room. Ethan, please do not do this right now. Victoria warned me from the kitchen doorway, her voice trembling violently with absolute, sheer panic. Her hands were shaking so badly the silver appetizer tray was loudly rattling against her rings. Do not do what exactly, Victoria? I asked calmly, slowly turning my head to face her. Do not tell your wealthy corporate guests that I paid the massive cash deposit for the expensive catering they are currently eating. Do not tell them I bought the vintage wine they are drinking from my personal checking account. He is highly medicated, Julian suddenly shouted at the absolute top of his lungs, his voice echoing frantically off the vaulted ceiling. He just had major abdominal surgery. He is suffering from intense post-surgery delirium. He absolutely does not know what he is saying. Please, everyone, just ignore him. I am absolutely not confused, Julian, I said loudly. Reaching my hand deep into my thick winter coat pocket, I slowly pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. It was absolutely not a Christmas gift. It was the devastating legal packet my aggressive lawyer, Marcus, had officially drafted. And I am absolutely not a stagnant loser. Losers do not completely fund your fake luxury lifestyle for 3 full years while you pretend to be a wealthy corporate tycoon to your friends. I walked purposefully over to the expensive glass side table, directly next to where Richard and Tom, the 2 massive angel investors, were standing in complete shock. I firmly placed the heavy legal envelope down onto the glass with a loud, incredibly satisfying thud. That document is a formal, legally binding demand for the immediate repayment of the $150,000 I have personally loaned you since 2023, I said, addressing the entire room of VIP guests but keeping my hard eyes locked entirely on my older brother. That massive sum officially includes the expensive private school tuition for your children that you lied and told everyone you paid with your corporate bonuses. It also strictly includes the massive monthly lease on the white Porsche Macan parked outside. You are completely lying, Julian screamed violently, physically lunging forward toward the glass table to grab the envelope. Richard, the taller of the 2 wealthy investors, instantly stepped directly in front of Julian, holding his hand up like a strict traffic cop. Let the man speak, Richard said coldly, his sharp eyes narrowing dangerously at Julian's pathetic display. I permanently canceled all of the automated bank payments 3 weeks ago, I continued, feeling physically lighter and incredibly powerful with every single word leaving my mouth, because you proudly told me on the phone that I did not fit your exclusive aesthetic. You were right. I absolutely do not fit in here, because I actually pay my own bills with my own money. Ethan, you are completely ruining this family. My father, Arthur, suddenly yelled from the sofa, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of purple. How dare you embarrass your brother like this? We gave Julian our entire retirement savings. We completely drained your future college fund and your grandfather's inheritance to build his business. If you destroy his reputation tonight, you destroy us all. We have absolutely nothing left. The secondary twist hit the room like a massive, devastating earthquake. My own parents had secretly bankrolled his early failures using money that rightfully belonged to both of us, completely pushing themselves to the absolute brink of poverty just to maintain Julian's golden child status. They had literally bet their entire lives on a losing horse, draining their 401k accounts, and now they were aggressively demanding I pay the terrible gambling debts to save their fragile egos. Suddenly, the dark living room was violently bathed in pulsing, aggressive orange and yellow light. The bright flashing colors were coming directly from the massive bay window facing the street. Everyone in the room simultaneously turned their heads toward the glass. Outside in the freezing snow, a massive, heavy-duty tow truck had aggressively backed directly into the driveway, completely blocking the elegant corporate town car and the electric Tesla. The bright flashing lights reflected sharply off the falling snow, casting a chaotic, nightclub-style strobe glow over the perfectly decorated Christmas tree inside. A large, burly man wearing a thick high-visibility jacket aggressively hopped out of the truck cab holding a metal clipboard. He confidently walked right up to the heavy oak front door, which Julian had left partially open, and knocked loudly on the glass panel. "I am looking for a Victoria," the repo man shouted loudly, his rough voice slightly muffled but incredibly audible through the cold glass. "I have a highly expedited legal order for the immediate repossession of a 2023 white Porsche Macan. I see it hiding on the side of the house. You can hand me the electronic key right now, lady, or I can forcefully use the steel hook to drag it out of the bushes. Your absolute choice. The crushing silence inside the massive living room was absolute, total, and completely suffocating. Victoria's hands finally gave out. She violently dropped the heavy silver tray of expensive appetizers directly onto the hardwood floor. The loud, sharp crash of breaking ceramic plates and the messy splatter of shrimp cocktail flying across the pristine white rug was the absolute only sound echoing in the massive house. Eleanor, the vice president, slowly looked out the bay window at the flashing yellow lights of the tow truck, then looked directly down at the thick legal demand letter resting ominously on the glass table, and finally locked her highly disappointed eyes on Julian. Her facial expression was absolutely not angry. It was deeply, profoundly pitying, which was infinitely worse in the ruthless corporate world. I think we should all leave immediately, Eleanor said very quietly to the two angel investors, firmly setting her crystal champagne glass down on the nearest table. No, wait, please. Julian scrambled desperately toward them, practically crawling over the ruined shrimp cocktail, aggressively grabbing the sleeve of Richard's highly expensive suit jacket. Richard, Tom, Eleanor, please. It is a massive banking error, a complete misunderstanding. My brother is mentally unstable and trying to actively sabotage the massive deal. We can fix this right now. Richard violently shook Julian's desperate hand off his expensive suit jacket as if the fabric were suddenly covered in toxic, radioactive slime. The absolute only massive error here tonight, Julian, the investor said with freezing, calculated coldness, was you arrogantly assuming we would not run our deep corporate due diligence. We fully knew about your LLC filing status being entirely delinquent. We just attended tonight to see if you would be honest and transparent about your cash flow. Clearly, honesty is absolutely not your strong suit. Do not ever contact my corporate office again. The investors turned around and confidently walked out. They aggressively stepped right over the massive mess on the expensive rug. They walked briskly past a completely stunned, hyperventilating Julian. They walked straight out the heavy front door, completely ignoring the burly repo man who was currently operating loud hydraulic machinery to firmly hook up Victoria's beloved white Porsche, and disappeared into the freezing winter night. I stood completely alone in the absolute center of the ruined living room. The rest of the high society crowd, the wealthy neighbors and distant corporate acquaintances, were frantically rushing to the coat closet, incredibly eager to escape the massive, radioactive awkwardness of the situation. I want a complete divorce, Victoria suddenly screamed at the absolute top of her lungs, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly in front of her face. She aggressively pointed a shaking finger at Julian. I am absolutely done with this fake life. I am filing for full custody of Leo and Chloe, and I am moving back to my parents' estate tomorrow morning. You completely ruined my professional career in front of my boss. Julian slowly turned his head to look at me. He looked incredibly small. He looked rapidly aged. The ridiculous burgundy velvet jacket suddenly looked like a cheap, poorly fitted costume from a terrible high school play. You completely ruined my life, he whispered brokenly, hot tears streaming rapidly down his pale face. You destroyed absolutely everything I built. No, Julian, I said calmly, slowly buttoning up my thick winter coat to prepare for the freezing weather outside. I absolutely did not destroy anything. I just finally turned the bright lights on so everyone could see the rot. The immediate aftermath was absolutely not an explosive, violent physical fight. It was a slow, pathetic, agonizing deflation of massive egos. I did not stay in the cold driveway to watch the beautiful luxury car get violently towed away into the night. I did not stay to listen to Victoria violently screaming about hiring a vicious divorce lawyer to claim full custody of the children and every last penny in their empty accounts. I did not stay to hear my parents aggressively crying about their completely lost retirement funds and their ruined social standing. I simply walked out the front door, confidently got into my highly reliable, fully paid-off Honda, sat quietly in the driver's seat, and just breathed. For the absolute first time in many long years, the crushing, suffocating weight on my chest, the exhausting secret-keeping, the massive financial stress, and the constant, draining need to blindly protect my terrible family from harsh reality was completely gone. The dramatic death of that toxic family dynamic felt exactly like a long overdue funeral, but instead of immense grief, I only felt incredible, overwhelming peace. I drove home, made myself a massive cup of hot chocolate, and watched a comedy movie. I spent Christmas Day entirely alone in my quiet house, and it was easily the most peaceful, wonderful holiday I had ever experienced in my entire life. In the stressful months that closely followed the disastrous party, the fake house of cards collapsed completely into absolute dust. Without my massive monthly funding, and with zero wealthy investors willing to back him, Julian absolutely could not sustain the bloated mortgage. The bank aggressively pushed the house into foreclosure. They were forced to put the massive property on the real estate market in late January. It sold relatively quickly, but after aggressively paying off the massive bank debt and the numerous legal liens, strictly including the $150,000 lawsuit demand which my lawyer Marcus had filed with ruthless efficiency, they walked away with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs. The fake corporate dream officially died a quiet, pathetic death. Victoria made good on her loud threat. She immediately filed for divorce, demanded full custody of the kids, and moved back to Connecticut. Julian was forced to move into a tiny, incredibly depressing two-bedroom apartment near the loud city center. He finally had to get a real, grueling job. He was absolutely not a CEO. He became a mid-level, highly stressed account manager aggressively selling commercial HVAC systems over the phone. My parents were forced to quietly apply for part-time retail jobs at a local hardware store in their late 60s because they had foolishly handed Julian their entire life savings. I absolutely did not speak to a single member of my family for 6 full months. I deeply needed the physical and emotional distance. I needed the quiet time to properly heal from the devastating realization that my parents and my older brother had solely viewed me as a disposable financial resource rather than a human being. But in late April, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was absolutely not from Julian. It was from my nephew, Leo. "Can you please come to my soccer game today, Uncle Ethan? Dad says he has to work and cannot make it." I went. I sat quietly on the cold aluminum bleachers, wearing my comfortable sweatpants and a simple hoodie, proudly watching my young nephew run around on a slightly muddy, highly uneven public school sports field. He was absolutely not wearing the expensive, custom-tailored St. Jude's uniform anymore. He looked a little scruffier, a little more tired, but he also looked genuinely happier and significantly lighter. When the whistle blew and the game officially ended, he ran excitedly across the field toward me. My niece Chloe was there too, sitting quietly in the green grass, happily drawing in the exact professional sketchbook I had sent her for Christmas. "Uncle Ethan," Leo shouted, throwing his arms around me and getting wet mud all over my clean jacket. I absolutely did not care. "Hey there, buddy," I said warmly, squeezing him back tightly. "Dad told us you are secretly super rich," Leo said innocently, pulling back and looking directly up at me with massive, curious eyes. "Is that actually true?" I laughed loudly, a genuine, booming sound that felt incredibly good in my chest. "I am very comfortable, Leo. I am comfortable because I work incredibly hard every single day, and I do not buy expensive things. I absolutely do not need to impress people who do not care about me. Dad says he is really sorry." Chloe suddenly piped up, not even looking up from her colorful drawing. "He strongly told Mom he was incredibly stupid." I slowly looked up across the muddy field and saw Julian quietly standing completely alone by the chain-link parking lot fence. He was wearing a cheap, wrinkled windbreaker and stained khaki pants. He looked incredibly exhausted. He had visibly gained a significant amount of weight, and his hair was actively thinning. He was absolutely not the golden boy anymore. He was not a fake tycoon. He was just a deeply broken, heavily stressed guy working a terribly hard job to pay his child support. He saw me looking at him and slowly, highly hesitantly, raised his hand in a small wave. He did not dare come over to the bleachers. He kept his physical distance, finally respecting the massive, immovable boundary I had legally and emotionally set. I absolutely did not wave back at him, but I offered a single, firm nod of my head. It was absolutely not instant forgiveness. It will take years of consistent therapy for me to even consider forgiving that level of betrayal. But it was a solid acknowledgement that he was finally living in the real world with the rest of us. As we walked slowly toward my highly reliable, fully paid-off car, I realized something incredibly profound and important. Julian had actually been completely right about one specific thing when he called me that terrible day. That highly exclusive Christmas party was absolutely no place for losers. But standing there holding my sweet niece's small hand, knowing my mortgage was fully paid, my massive investment accounts were secure, and my conscience was entirely clear, I knew exactly who the real winner was. I was absolutely not the incredibly insecure man who desperately needed a wealthy audience to feel valuable. I was absolutely not the pathetic man who heavily relied on a rented velvet jacket and a leased luxury car to feel important in a room full of strangers. I was Ethan. I was the silent foundation. I was the ghostwriter. And for the absolute first time in my entire life, I had successfully rewritten my own story and fixed my own life first. And let me tell you, that incredible peace of mind is the absolute best aesthetic a person could ever possibly wear. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.